For exploration to be sustained over a many, many years period, it cannot be tied to a particular Congress or particular administration or even a particular NASA administration. Long-term exploration requires being tied to broader, enduring national interests that go beyond a particular party or particular group. Uh, if you look at the history of human space exploration and NASA, what you predominantly see is human space exploration is driven by enduring geopolitical interests. Certainly, the race to the moon was part of a geopolitical competition with the Soviet Union. The Apollo-Soyuz test mission was an example of geopolitical cooperation as a part of decisions between President Nixon and Brezhnev over the idea of détente in that period. If you look at the space station program, it was a decision during the Reagan administration to bind together the emerging space agencies of Japan and Europe as part of an anti-Soviet coalition. The decision by the Clinton administration to bring Russia into the space station was a symbol of post-Soviet cooperation with Russia and a symbol of a new relationship. This doesn't mean that capability-driven evolution hasn't occurred prior to today in the human exploration program. It has. Probably the primary example of that is the beginning of the space shuttle program itself. The Nixon administration made a decision to proceed with the space shuttle as a project, but without really defining what it was going to do, what larger set of interests it was going to serve. The Nixon administration primarily made a decision not to cancel human spaceflight, but did not really specify what human spaceflight was for. They didn't want to end human spaceflight, but at the same time, they didn't want to go into an open-ended Cold War-like commitment that had driven certainly the Apollo program. They obviously also were not ready to commit to a major program of human space exploration the way various advocates would have had it. So NASA proposals for a lunar base, for a major space station, all of those things were put in abeyance. And the space shuttle program was probably the only thing that could have been approved at that time. It was, of course, a magnificent capability that was being contemplated. There was hopes that it would reduce the cost of launch, but the focus became very much on costs and operational lifetimes and reusability, and not on what it would actually do. This was in line with the Nixon administration desire to make space a more routine place, not only technically, but also politically, that it was not going to be treated as an exceptional activity the way it had in Kennedy and even in the Johnson administration, but it would take its place in the phrase in a sequence of other national priorities and would not stand out separate from those priorities. So capability-driven evolution was the basis of the space shuttle, and this was problematic for much of the program's lifetime because it was difficult to say where is it going, what is it going to be doing. In the aftermath of the two shuttle accidents, the limitations of this approach became quite clear. In the case of the Challenger accident, when all unmanned payloads or that could be launched with unmanned vehicles were moved off the vehicle, that of course undercut the primary economic rationale for the shuttle. That is, it would be the predominant low-cost launcher for space transportation. And in the case of the Columbia accident, it raised deeper questions of why are we putting human life at risk? What is it we're going toward? And merely sending humans to and from low Earth orbit was not something that in itself justified the risk to human life. There had to be a larger goal, a larger direction, which is what led eventually to the vision for space exploration during the Bush administration. There are some similarities to NASA today to situations in the past, but there are also aspects about today which are rather unique. I was working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory during the 1970s when, of course, the NASA budgets had declined greatly from Apollo period. There was great disappointment that we were not carrying on future human exploration. There were certainly some very impressive science activities that were going on. Viking landed on Mars, for example, in 1976. And there was the hope that the space shuttle program would really bring in a new era. So while budgets were very tight, and there was definitely a sense of disappointment and ending of the Apollo effort, there was a sense that the shuttle program coming on board would provide new sets of capabilities that would eventually allow for returning outward. So today, the budget problems that NASA is facing and the uncertainties about the future are in some ways familiar. But they're different in that there is not a large program that NASA itself can organize itself around and direct. In the case of the asteroid redirect mission, maybe that mission will be it. But that's a singular mission. That's not something like a broad capability that you would have like the space shuttle or later the space station program. So what's needed, in my view, is a idea of a direction after the International Space Station program. And that direction needs to be responsive to the world as it is today, not the world, say, of the 1960s or of the 1970s. The primary characteristic of today's world is twofold. One is an increasingly globalized environment of international partners, not only who are very capable, such as our space station partners, but also emerging countries, India, China, who are developing and have developed a very broad and wide range of space capabilities, and with whom we do not have the broad and deep relationship that we have with our existing traditional international space station partners. So responding to globalization somehow, I think, is a crucial need. The second reason that's different today is we have a new generation of entrepreneurial companies that are bringing new ideas and new thoughts into how we can do space in a way that is less expensive and more efficient than in the past. Now, this is actually not completely new. We have had, of course, commercial space activities since the very beginning of the space program. In the case of communication satellites, we have had several generations of space entrepreneurs come and go since the 1970s. The general outcome is most of them die, which is the nature of new ventures. But some of them live, and some of them are quite capable and are capable of impressive new feats. So involving and using the private sector, involving and using international partners is going to be the requirement, I think, for future exploration going forward. And that's why it's a different world today than in the past. Now, looking at what things can be done, the immediate thing you notice is that missions to Mars or missions to an asteroid don't really provide opportunities for those major forces to be involved. Many of the international partners, when they heard of the space direction that the administration was taking, felt that they really had no place. They were planning for returning to the moon with us. They themselves may not have been to the moon, but they saw the moon as a challenging but doable target. In the case of asteroid missions or Mars missions, they felt that that was beyond their reach, and they were really not able to go back to their governments and ask for funding for such activities. So the United States, perhaps inadvertently, wound up excluding many of the international partners that in today's world we actually do need and should depend on for both political and economic and resource reasons. The other factor was that the private sector didn't have as many opportunities to participate in an asteroid or Mars mission. Whereas in the case of lunar missions, again, the private sector are certainly capable of building maybe small rovers for the surface. The private sector is capable of delivering cargo to the lunar surface, which would create a larger addressable market than staying home or staying just at the space station. So a fundamental strategic mismatch occurred, in my view, with the abandonment of the moon as a longer-term goal. Because it failed to account for the international community and the private sector community, and it failed to then give a clear direction for NASA as a government institution to organize and direct its activities going forward. NASA could certainly do a mission to an asteroid, say the asteroid retrieval mission. I have no doubt that NASA could do a mission, say, to the moons of Mars. But whether or not such missions could be sustained would depend on whether or not they involve, again, these other centers of interest, the private sector and the international community, and whether or not they serve broader geopolitical interests. Merely because the mission is technically feasible doesn't mean it's going to be sustainable. And so, again, today I think we have missed opportunities to create sustainable missions, even while we're talking about missions that are technically feasible.